The notice came on a Tuesday, which Nora would always remember because Tuesday was the day her father made pancakes. He had them on the griddle when the city sedan pulled up, a gray, immaculate thing that had no business on their block, and Nora watched from the find yourself kitchen window as two men in pressed shirts stepped out with clipboards and a kind of deliberate unhurry that meant they had already decided something. She left the pancakes and came to the shop doorway. Her father was wiping his hands on a red rag, the way he always did before he spoke to anyone. He was not a tall man. He was compact and careful in his movements, the way people get when they have spent years working in tight spaces, reaching into the dark hearts of engines that could take a finger if you weren't paying attention. The inspector introduced himself. His name was Bryce Callum, and he had the smooth confidence of a man who delivered bad news often enough that it had stopped feeling like bad news to him. The city liaison, a younger man named Terrence Plank, stood slightly behind him with a folder tucked under his arm and said nothing yet, though he would. Marcus Hale listened to the first 2 minutes of the inspection report with his arms crossed and his face composed. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He looked at Bryce Callum the way he looked at a stripped bolt, as a problem he was assessing, not one he was afraid of. Then Plank spoke. He said it loud enough for the customer waiting on his transmission repair, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Fowler who sat in a phone chair with a paperback to look up. Loud enough for the man washing windows across the street to pause. This isn't a real garage, Plank said. It's a junkyard with a sign. Nora felt the words land in her chest. She was 16, and she had grown up in this shop. She knew every corner of it. The smell of gear oil and cold concrete in winter. The way the afternoon light came through the transom above the bay door and laid a gold bar across the floor. The shelf of handwritten notebooks her father kept organized by year, going back further than she'd been alive. She knew the framed photograph on the wall behind the desk. Her mother, laughing the summer before she got sick, standing in this exact bay with grease on her hands because she had insisted on learning how to change her own oil. The inspector handed her father a formal closure notice. The land, he explained, had been earmarked for a new luxury automotive complex, a branded service center, glass and chrome, the kind that existed in 17 other cities and needed to exist here too. Marcus would have 60 days to vacate or contest. Her father looked at the notice for a long moment. He folded it precisely along its own crease and set it on the workbench. "Thank you for coming," he said. That was all. No argument, no raised voice. He showed them to the door as if they had come for a scheduled appointment, and then he went back to Mrs. Fowler's transmission. Nora stood in the doorway a while longer after the gray sedan pulled away. She thought about the notebooks on that shelf, the years of careful handwriting inside them. Measurements, tolerances, fabrication notes, the kind of knowledge that was not taught anywhere, but lived in the hands of the man who had gathered it. She thought about what it had cost him to build this place after her mother died, how he had turned down work in 3 different cities to stay here, to stay close to the elementary school and the neighborhood and the ordinary Tuesday mornings, with pancakes on the griddle. She thought about what Plank had said, and she decided quietly that she did not accept it. The unmarked car came on a Thursday 6 days later, just before noon. It was a dark blue sedan, older and well-kept, with out-of-state plates. Nora was in the office doing homework when she heard it pull up. The man who stepped out was in his late 60s, gray-haired, with the measured economy of movement that she associated with her father and with no one else she had ever met. He carried something wrapped in a canvas cloth, about the length of a forearm, and he stood outside the bay door and looked at the sign above it for a moment before he came in. Her father was at the workbench. He looked up. The man unwrapped the canvas on the bench without preamble and set down a suspension upright, raw aluminum, machined, with a seized bearing carrier that had been fought over and lost by, he said quietly, 4 restoration specialists in 2 cities. "I tracked the original fabricator to this address," the man said. "A man named Marcus Hale. I was told he retired from the circuit 15 years ago." He paused. "I wasn't sure I'd find the shop still open." Something shifted in her father's face. Not surprise exactly, recognition. The kind that comes when you hear your own name, spoken in a voice from a life you set down a long time ago. He picked up the upright carefully, turned it in his hands, held it under the shop light. Nora knew, because she had read enough of the notebooks by now to understand the shapes, that this was not an ordinary part. The geometry of it was deliberate and specific. It had been designed by someone who understood what would happen to it at racing speed, under load, in a corner taken at a limit that most people would never approach. It had been designed, she understood slowly, by her father. He worked for 40 minutes. He did not explain what he was doing as he did it. He ground a tool from a worn file, worked penetrant into a gap she couldn't have found with her eyes, applied heat in two precise intervals, and then with a motion so unhurried it looked almost casual, the carrier turned free. The man standing across the bench from him was quiet for a long moment. "Your name is on those cars," the man said. "The frame geometry, the brake fabrication, 3 championships." He looked at Nora's father the way a person looks at something they have been trying to find for a long time. "I don't think the people in this city know what they have here." Her father set the upright down gently. "Most places don't," he said. "It's all right." But Nora, standing in the office doorway where no one had noticed her, did not think it was all right. She thought about the closure notice folded on the workbench. She thought about Bryce Callum and his clipboard and Terrence Plank's loud, dismissive voice. She thought about her mother in that photograph laughing. She picked up her father's notebook and began to read. 6 weeks later, the shop was full, not with customers, with journalists, city officials, a representative from the National Automotive Heritage Board, and the 2 men from the gray sedan, who stood against the back wall near the door. Bryce Callum held a program. Terrence Plank had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the floor. The man who had come with the seized upright. His name was Roland Fitch, and Nora had since learned that his name was in the record books alongside her father's work, though her father's name had never appeared in the headlines, stood at the front of the bay and spoke without notes. He described 3 championship seasons. He described the geometry decisions that had made the difference between a car that held its line and a car that didn't. He described the brake fabrication work, the tolerances held by hand to standards that modern machines would have struggled to match. He described a young man who had walked away from all of it, from the money and the recognition and the career that was opening in front of him, to go home and raise a daughter alone after his wife died, and who had opened a neighborhood shop and kept the knowledge alive in notebooks on a shelf and in the work of his hands. "I have been in this industry for 40 years, Roland Fitch said. "I have worked with the best fabricators alive. What Marcus Hale's hands know is not taught. It is not replicated. It exists in this building, and it should be recognized as such." The Heritage Board representative said a few formal words after that, and the designation was made official. The shop would be protected, the closure notice voided, the land removed from the development earmark. Someone took photographs. Someone asked her father a question, and he answered it quietly and precisely, the way he answered everything. Nora stood beside him. She had spent 6 weeks doing what her notebooks and her father's handwriting had given her the vocabulary to do. She had written letters, made calls, compiled a document that laid out in plain terms what existed in this shop and why it mattered. She had sent it to Roland Fitch first, then to the Heritage Board, then to a journalist who covered automotive history. She had not told her father she was doing it. She had not known exactly whether it would work. She had only known that she believed him. She had always believed him. She had just needed the world to give her the language to say so. When Roland Fitch finished speaking and the room shifted into the murmur of congratulation and questions, her father turned to her. He looked at her for a moment, with the full, quiet attention he gave to things he was trying to understand completely. "You did this," he said. "You built the cars," she said. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. And across the shop, she could see Bryce Callum reading the heritage plaque that had been mounted that morning on the wall above her mother's photograph. She could see him reading it twice. The afternoon light came through the transom the way it always did, and lay its gold bar across the concrete floor, and the shop smelled of gear oil and cold stone, and the particular stillness of a place that has been here a long time and now knows it will stay. Her father's hands, resting at his side, were still marked with the work of 40 years. She thought they were the most honest thing she had ever seen. She did not cry until later, in the car, when no one could see her, and even then it was not grief. It was the feeling of a word finally spoken that she had been holding in her chest since she was old enough to understand what her father had given up, and what he had chosen instead, and why it was the right choice, and why the world had taken this long to agree. She wiped her eyes. She looked at the shop one more time through the rear window as they pulled away. It was still there. It would still be there tomorrow. That was enough. That was everything.